Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. The trickle has slowed. Welcome this morning to the last day of FDP. We're the Expanded Clearinghouse Subcommittee, and we'll get going right in here and introduce ourselves as we go. I'm Amanda Haymaker. I'm the Director of Pre-Ward at Purdue, one of the co-chairs for the Expanded Clearinghouse. Today, we're going to talk to you just about some general information about the clearinghouse, and then we'll give some system updates, some information around some system updates that are coming this year, some user management tips. We're going to talk about the status of conflict of interest fields and when those will be required in the future. Our subrecipient monitoring tools working group will present on the non-single audit profile pilot that's in progress of launching, and a little bit about the risk assessment questionnaire. And then we'll have some information shared about the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and audits for NIH foreign grant recipients. Next slide. So just in general, most of you probably know this, but in case we have anyone new, we'll share a little information about what the Expanded Clearinghouse is. It's a system that publishes organizations' profile information online in a repository where you can access their general information without sharing those subrecipient commitment forms that ask for the same information over and over again. So these are general things like your UEI number, your SAM status, expiration date, audit links, F&A rates, those sorts of things. Pass-through entities utilize the information when awarding subawards or doing their subrecipient monitoring. Reduces burden both for proposal and award stages at the participating institutions, and it's really intended to replace those long subrecipient commitment forms and unique pass-through entity letters of intent. We want to be as standard as possible so that we can just accept and move on without providing duplicate information over and over again. Next slide. This is our committee. We have a really great committee of people who've been with us, some for a long time and some that are brand new. You'll see we added 2 new members since the last meeting, Jokari McMillan from Texas Tech University and Nancy Thoman from Florida Atlantic University. And this group of members work hard to review profiles and provide feedback and input as we work through changes and handling all the workings and behind the scenes for the Expanded Clearinghouse. Next slide. We currently have 341 Expanded Clearinghouse profiles published in the system. 216 of these are FDP members. Every FDP member should have a published profile, and then we have 125 non-member participants that we have added over the last several years. I believe there's about 18 profiles in progress as well, so that number will continue to rise as we get their profiles finalized and published. Previously, we had sent invitations to interested non-FDP institutions to join on a quarterly basis, but we're going to switch that to twice a year, biannually, this year. So the next invitations will get sent out in March with a goal of having published profiles by July, and then again in September for published profiles by January. And we think we've got to a point where we have kind of a steady volume of interest on the wait list, but not enough to warrant more than twice a year. It makes it a little easier to manage as well from a invoicing and the reviews of the profile standpoint. So next slide. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer. She's going to talk to you about some system updates.
All right. So we're always looking at what we can do to try to improve the functioning of the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse. And of course, this being FDP, we're interested in reducing burden where we can. So we have some system updates that we've been talking about for a while, and we are thinking that we will be implementing the system updates in mid-2024. We've talked about some of these before. First of all, the removal of the DUNS field. It's been almost 2 years now since the UEI replaced DUNS. So the DUNS field is no longer really relevant. So our plan later this year is to take that field out of the system so that it's no longer visible, and just keep that UEI field, since that's the number that is most relevant for our work. Second, we're talking about using a function where we would have the SAM expiration date auto update in the system. So this would avoid institutions having to go in and update the SAM expiration date themselves. Now, this will only occur if the organization's SAM registration is active and the SAM expiration date that's showing in SAM.gov is later than the date that's in the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse. We understand that not everyone, oh, can you go back one? We understand that not everyone may wish to take advantage of this function. So we are planning to have an option for participating organizations to turn off the auto updating and have the option to update that SAM expiration date manually. Third bullet, you may remember that we recently allowed a couple of Canadian organizations into the Expanded Clearinghouse. And we are looking later this year to expand that participation to participants in Australia and the UK who are subject either to a single audit or a program-specific audit under the uniform guidance. We believe that there will be minor updates necessary to allow that expansion. And Tyra will be talking just a little bit about the non-single audit entity pilot. So I'll leave that to her. She'll go into that in great detail. But the last bullet on the slide that I wanted to mention is for those non-FTP member organizations, we're going to add a field behind the scenes on the contacts tab for an invoicing contact. Now, for those non-FTP member organizations, the invoicing contact isn't always the same as the primary contact. So we wanted to capture that somewhere where it is easy to find. And again, this is for our internal use, so that invoicing contact won't actually be visible on the public profile. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to talk just a little bit about user management. Now, when somebody has the role of managing users and are signed into the FTP Expanded Clearinghouse, when one is signed in, there is a button near the top of the screen that says Manage Users. And it's a little bit small, but that red circle there is around that Manage Users button. So this is information or screenshots from my institution, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can see that we have 2 users registered in the system. 2 of them are user managers, and we have 1 authorized profile certifier and 1 profile editor. So I just wanted to show you where this user management function is. And users are different than the contacts that are listed in the profile. Next slide, please. So in terms of users, users are those individuals at a participating organization who have some role with management and administration of the organization's profile. They edit the profile, they submit the profile, they certify the profile. So there are a few specific roles. So the profile editor is the one who makes the edits to the organization's profile and submits those updates to the authorized profile certifier. That authorized profile certifier reviews the edits that are made, certifies the updates, and then submits those updates to FDP. And then a third role is of user manager. So that user manager role is important because that user manager can add, remove, or modify access for other individuals at a participating organization. We wanted to talk about this because in some cases, participating organizations have one person serving all of these different roles. And that can be an issue or problematic if that person leaves the participating organization. So the second bullet is that we want you to know that there can be multiple profile editors and user managers. And we, in fact, encourage you to have multiple profile editors and user managers so that your organization can maintain continuity and access to your organization's profile. Now, the last bullet is just a reminder that that authorized profile certifier is responsible for reviewing any changes that are made, ensuring their accuracy in a timely manner, and then submitting that to FTP for the final review and publication of the profile. So again, we just want to encourage organizations to consider having multiple profile editors and user managers to ensure continuity and access to that organization's profile. Next slide, please. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is conflict of interest questions. We talked about this back in September, and we did a little poll about completion of these questions. So we added these about a year ago to the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse because we realized that the question that we had previously focused on the PHS FCY policy, and that seemed somewhat outdated, and it seemed more relevant to expand how we asked about institutional compliance and with multiple agency policies. So that led us to creating multiple questions in that conflict of interest section. Next slide, please. So at this point in time, about half of the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse participants have provided full or partial answers to those COI questions that were implemented about a year ago. And we think that it's time to bite the bullet and require that people respond to these questions. But, fear not, we're going to give you lots of time to do this. We're going to turn on validation for these COI questions as of June 1st. So organizations still have lots of time to go in, look at those questions if they haven't already answered them or if they haven't fully answered them, and respond. So we will, as of June 1st and going forward, require that there be responses entered for those questions in the conflict of interest section. There is a field within that section to indicate if your organization is compliant with the COI policy of an agency other than PHS, NSF, NASA, or DOE. If you respond yes in that other agency's field, you'll have an option to enter in the other agency, for instance, EPA, for which your organization has a compliant policy. So that is an option beyond those 4 agencies that are listed. The other thing that we wanted to note is that COGR has an incredibly helpful table with federal research security requirements. And one of the columns in that table includes different agency requirements related to financial conflict of interest. So we wanted to refer you to this table so that you can check and see for these agencies or for other agencies, what that particular sponsor requires and if your organization is in fact compliant. So that is there for your reference. I'm going to turn it over to Tyra to talk about the subrecipient monitoring tools working group activities.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Tyra Darville-Lane from Northwestern University. I'm co-chair of the Subrecipient Monitoring Tools Working Group, along with Walker File. We have two major activities that we've been working on since the working group came together. One of them being the non-single audit entity profile, also referred to as the NSAP. We do have a pilot that's coming soon on that. And also our second major lift is to update the risk assessment questionnaire. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the NSAP pilot launch is coming soon. I'm giving you some information that's going to be a reminder to some, but then it may be new to others. This pilot is going to test how much workloads are reduced by collecting information in one repository. So consistent with what is happening currently in the expanded clearinghouse. Opportunity to test and perfect the contents of the NSAP before building additional functionality in the expanded clearinghouse. Next slide. The NSAP does follow the structure of the current FDP expanded clearinghouse profiles. It consists of questions that would typically be asked of a non-single audit entity during a risk assessment. It also addresses the topics such as financial statements, accounting and procurement practices, as well as compliance policies. Next slide. So we have several steps in the NSAP preparation for its pilot launch. And so one of the steps was to send out an invitation to the FDP member administrative representative so that they will have an opportunity to opt in to the pilot. And also with that opt-in, they were able to nominate they or their delegate could nominate non-single audit entities to be participants in the pilot. So in November, we sent that invitation out to the FDP member administrative reps. The deadline for response was finally December the 8th. And the results of that was that we had 18 FDP members opt in to the pilot. And among those 18 that opted in, they nominated 40 non-single audit entity participants. So the final, well, one of the next steps in this is that we're going to make a final decision as to the selection of the non-single audit entity participants to whom we're going to send invitations to join the pilot. And just keeping in mind what was stated earlier in the presentation regarding the kind of entities that are current or that we're going to build capacity to include a profile for. So that's U.S. institutions currently, Australia and UK entities that will be added later. And then we currently have Canada. So Canada and US, but then later coming soon will be UK and Australian institutions. So we're looking forward to that because we do want to incorporate those entities into the pilot if they wish to opt in as participants. Next slide. So again, just a reminder, when the FDP member pilot institutions opted in, they agreed to provide approval of, to opt in, to nominate up to 5 institutions to participate who are not subject to single audit. They also provide a contact for the selected nominees to introduce to the pilot. And then we're asking that they refrain from sending institution annual questionnaires to these participant entities. But we are, as we do with any non-pilot scenario, it's okay to send project-specific requests to these participants, but we're asking not to send entity information, institution-specific information, because this should be captured in the profile that we're going to have for them in the pilot. We're also asking that the FDP member institution would provide feedback to the working group, including some metrics such as the number of times a PTE had accessed the inside pilot in order to collect data. Next slide, please. So there is a financial questionnaire which we have created that will be added to the audit tab in the profile, in the expanded clearinghouse profile, because understanding that these entities are non-single audit entities. So in place of providing single audit information on that tab that you all are used to seeing, they will be able to upload their questionnaire to there. And the questionnaire, there's a limited number of questions that we ask, and that those things speak to, as we mentioned earlier, accounting policies, some of their other policies like procurement, their systems and things of that nature. So they'll be able to address that in a separate questionnaire that will be uploaded to the audit tab in the profile. And the financial questionnaire also provides some contextual help text that will allow the person completing the questionnaire to have some insight as to what we're looking for, what kind of answers, or not answers, but what kind of information that they need to provide. Next slide, please. So again, the financial questionnaire covers things such as the audited financials, DOD system reviews, DCAA information, accounting system, internal controls, funds management, documentation of personnel costs, procurement, property management, and equipment. So these are similar things that we all, information that we need to know about non-single audit entities in order to make a proper assessment of their internal controls. Next slide, please. So next, I want to give you some updates on the risk assessment questionnaire. So again, the subrecipient monitoring tool working group sent out a survey a while ago. It's been quite a while. And the community, the FDP member community response was that the risk assessment questionnaire, called the RAC, was a priority for the tool's update and improvement needs. And so we did prioritize that. So at the same time that we had a subgroup working on the NSAP, we had another subgroup within the working group to be working on the review. In the past several months, the working group has nearly completed all of its review and analysis, including a proposed updated RAC form. So don't be alarmed, because the form is going to be streamlined, but it's going to largely retain the previous format and the content that is in the current risk assessment. The updates will also include revised or added guidance to the PTE and a reference to the associated uniform guidance or other federal regulation or other resources to assist the PTE as they perform their risk assessment. And I think that's it for us. So that'll be coming soon. We'll keep the communication with the community to let you know when that is posted. All right, that concludes my part.
The next thing we want to talk about is the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, but I want to pause for a second and ask if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask unmute and ask or put in the chat. We did have a couple of questions come in, one from Amanda Humphrey. Will there be any guidance on research security assessment type questions? And from Joseph Oosterman, any guidance to be providing on how to utilize the results of the RAC-CAT scores?
So let me just address that second question first. So in terms of scoring, we did not focus or prioritize giving additional or any feedback as it relates to the scoring strategy. We think that it is really going to be up to the PTE institution to determine, in accordance with their own business processes and their risk tolerance, as to how to utilize the scoring. So right now, the scoring there is a proposed scoring strategy. However, you are open as an entity, as a PTE, to modify that consistent with your institution needs. So we did give a little bit of information or PTE guidance on the scoring, but largely we did not focus on the scoring. A lot of institutions are moving away from scoring and focusing in on their monitoring considerations based on a particular risk element, as opposed to coming together with everything as a score. So Northwestern is one of those institutions that we are moving away from the scoring, but we will give you more updates about this as the new RAC is accessible to the membership. Now, the first question about research security, we did not get deep into that at all either, because there's so many unresolved issues by sponsors and the guidance that they're going to be requiring. So what we do in essence as a catch-all is that if there's any other risk elements that are identified, you have to follow the sponsor requirements as it is related. So if you're a sub-site, if there is a project and you received a prime award and has some research security kinds of terms and conditions, then you will need to properly flow those down and adhere to those rules and regulations specific to the sponsor terms and conditions. So we're not going to be prescribing anything in that area either. There's so many unknowns. Any other questions?
Okay, I'll start in on the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, but if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them. Federal Audit Clearinghouse changed hands from the Census Bureau to the General Services Administration back in October. The Federal Audit Clearinghouse was a creation of the Uniform Guidance in 2014, and beginning with fiscal year 2016, began to house the single audit reports for the 35,000 or so domestic nonprofit organizations that undergo that audit. And the way I think about the FDP expanded clearinghouse versus the Federal Audit Clearinghouse is this. The Federal Audit Clearinghouse is wide but shallow. It hosts one thing and 35,000 of them. The FDP expanded clearinghouse is narrow but deep. It has about 100 data elements for each profile, and that includes the single audit report and results, and it houses data for about 340 organizations. So they serve different purposes and are operated by different organizations, but they're both organized around the same idea that it's better to store information in a central public repository rather than exchanging it privately over and over again. So I want to mention that the new Federal Audit Clearinghouse at fac.gov has some nice new features. It has an API, which allows for other systems to import data directly from it. And that's something that the expanded clearinghouse may take advantage of in some form at a later date. It also has a summary page for each audit, and that's new. And each summary page clearly indicates whether or not the organization has findings or not. You don't actually have to open the PDF and scroll down to the schedule of findings to get that information. You know right away whether there were findings or not. And that's nice. The summary page and the audits themselves now have direct links. That was not a feature of the old FAC site. And so those could be used when Expanded Clearinghouse participants update their audit results on our website. And I would encourage you to go ahead and do that and see how that works. And we might move to a more formal arrangement using the FAC links. One thing that is still lacking, though, is the complete data download that the old census site used and offered, and that many FDP members used to do bulk reviews of audit results. But my understanding is that will be replicated at some point. And in the meantime, you can do a search using multiple UEIs or EINs in their search box, and it will generate a summary report that has information about findings. And so I just wanted to ask if anyone has had experiences they'd like to share about the new website. I have noticed some oddities. Curious if anyone else has. Okay. Well, the audits in the Federal Audit Clearinghouse are like several other data elements in the Expanded Clearinghouse in that they have a central repository that is a primary source with the federal agency, and we're storing copies in the Expanded Clearinghouse, things like F&A rate agreements, audits, the SAM expiration date. And whenever there's an improvement in the primary repository, we're going to look to see how that can benefit the functioning of the Expanded Clearinghouse, whether we can use it directly, import it, refer to it behind the scenes when we do profile reviews. But basically anything, any improvements in functionality in those primary repositories, we're going to review those very carefully and make use of them. So obtaining single audit reports for domestic nonprofit organizations is relatively easy these days. But for foreign subrecipients, it's another story entirely. Those still have to be requested from the organizations themselves, and there are complications. The regulations are complex. My understanding is there are 3 different types of audits they can potentially undergo, and it can be a real challenge to communicate with those foreign organizations about the applicable regulations, to come to a mutual understanding, and then to receive the correct audit report. So back in December, the HHS Office of the Inspector General issued an audit about NIH, and in particular about the audits that foreign organizations receive. The gist of the audit was that these organizations are required to undergo and submit their audits to NIH, and NIH did not have most of them for the 2019 and 2020 fiscal years. And what's interesting to me is not so much the audit itself, but what appears in an appendix, Appendix B. And I will put Appendix B in the chat. And then also the data from Appendix B in a Google Sheet with UEIs where they could be determined. So this appendix contains a list of 55 foreign organizations, recipients of NIH funding, that were required to undergo an audit in 2019 and 2020. As far as I know, we have never seen such a list. And there were some surprises on it for me. There were organizations that I believe did not receive any kind of compliance audit, and they did. I also noticed that among the nominees for our non-single audit profile pilot were organizations on this list that are indeed subject to an audit. So I would encourage you to compare this list with your own records to see if any adjustments need to be made. There's really nothing that we have in our foreign subrecipient monitoring toolkit that is quite as useful as these audits. because they represent an independent auditor's evaluation of an organization's internal controls related to federal awards. There's nothing else that gives us that same level of assurance. And so it's a shame that this information about these audits and the audits themselves are difficult to obtain. And so I'd like to start thinking about ways that we could potentially make them more accessible. There could be a solution on the federal side. There could be a solution on the FDP side. From what I can tell by looking in usaspending.gov, most of the organizations on the list are receiving pass-through funding from at least one and sometimes several FDP member organizations. So we may collectively possess most of these audits in our records, and it's just a matter of getting them in a central location. And then I believe at least one of the organizations on the list puts their single audit on their own website, and so they're available publicly. And that could be another option. These organizations could put them in a public place. So I wanted to bring this up and see if anyone has been wrestling with these issues. I was also curious to know if anyone has developed an audit certification letter that is designed specifically for use with foreign organizations, that goes through all of the options and references all of the relevant OMB and agency regulations. I'm going to pause while I check the chat. So Courtney Chafin says that she's found in a few cases where the new audit clearinghouse, there aren't audits found when they were available in the original clearinghouse. I think they're still working on the data migration for everything from fiscal year 22 and earlier, and those eventually will appear in the new federal audit clearinghouse. Okay, Jennifer answered that, sorry. Courtney also asked, are the audits published in English? That's a good question. I typically see them in English, but I haven't looked at all these audits, and I wish I could. Okay, any other thoughts on this subject or anything else we've discussed? Or anything else we've not discussed that is related to the expanded clearinghouse or audits or repositories or subrecipient monitoring tools? Question came in, I definitely think an FTP repository would be helpful, but are there people who can maintain it? Yeah, that's the question. That's the challenge. It's organizational. You know, these 55 organizations could potentially at some point join the expanded clearinghouse and have all of their information there, but I think that would be a slow and difficult process and sometimes a costly one for those organizations. Okay, well, sounds like there is some interest in this subject, and so I think we'll look into it a little bit more and return at a later date with more information about what we can possibly do. So future considerations. We are thinking about expanding to additional countries in addition to Canada, Australia, and the UK. Those are the organizations that put themselves on our wait list. And so if you are at an organization that is at a country other than Canada, Australia, or the UK, I would say go ahead and put your information on our wait list, and we'll notice, and that will play into our what we propose for future updates. And then secondly, I want to see how we can use the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. My general impression at this point is that we could potentially import things like the audit PDFs, the audit links, information about when the most recent audit was, but that information about findings is still pretty complicated, particularly about whether findings are related specifically to an institution in a large audit, whether the findings are related to R&D or not. That's still difficult to get and might need to be provided by the participating organizations. And then lastly, research security certifications. Those are somewhere on the horizon, and we want to be mindful of those as well. And lastly, some reminders. We send out notifications where we can that information is expired, but the participating organizations are required to keep that information up to date, to pay attention and to update where needed. The audit report, F&A rate agreement, SAM expiration date, and it was, as was mentioned earlier, it's important that we have good information about our contacts and our users for each profile. Also want to mention, as we try to, whenever we can, that if you are receiving inappropriate requests for entity information that is already in the expanded clearinghouse, please push back on those requests. We have some suggested language on our website, and it's very important to loop in the primary contact of that organization as is shown on their expanded clearinghouse profile. 99.9% of the time, those requests are unintentional. They're made by people who might be new, people who might be in a department, people who don't know about the expanded clearinghouse, and the primary contact does, and they can set things right. And if you're in the small number of organizations that receive those requests and that process doesn't work, then please get in touch with the co-chairs. Please email us, and we'll take it from there. So we have two email inboxes, one for general systems help and one for general questions. These go to the entire subcommittee. We're interested to hear any of your thoughts on anything we've discussed today. Okay, Stephanie Scott is asking, can you send me the suggested language? It's on the expanded clearinghouse website itself. I'll send you the link. I don't think I'm not sure if it was actually on the main FTP website or not.
Actually, Anne-Marie Baker just posted a link to the pushback language.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie.
It's on the FTP Expanded Clearinghouse under the Resources tab.
And Stephanie, yes, please unmute yourself.
Hi. Oh, yeah. So that's what I just wanted to clarify. Since I'm in the communications committee, we transferred a lot of content from the old website to the new website. And I do know that pushback language, it was also on the old website, and I think it got lost in the transfer. So we don't have to republish it there again if it's already on the clearinghouse. It's up to you. So just wanted to bring that up. But then there was another thing I wanted to bring up. So in the middle of your presentation, I unfortunately had a really important call and I had to step away, so I probably missed what you said about the new questions regarding COI. And I know that I'll just take a guess that you probably mentioned about how that's going to be required soon in the coming months, to answer those questions. So I just wanted to share something that I recently experienced that may be helpful for everyone else here. So here, at Columbia, we didn't answer that DOE question yet because we were still finalizing our official policies and procedures. So we had left it for the DOE one, at least, as unanswered. And very recently, within the last couple of weeks, we had the experience where a pass-through entity was issuing us a subaward, an inbound subaward to us. And as a result of not answering that question in the clearinghouse, the entity threw in, one, they asked us point blank to clarify whether we have a policy. And then two, they also threw in an additional attachment in the FDP subaward itself, I think it was like 1 or 2 pages long of the DOE COE policy, right? Like they added additional language into the subboard. And so since then, at least here at Columbia, we just changed it because we did finalize our policies and procedures, and now it's answered in the clearinghouse. But besides that, I thought it would be important for other people on the call to know that people are really looking at those questions now. And you could get from another pass-through entity questions or even them sticking additional language or attachments in the subaward agreement if you leave it unanswered. And also leaving it unanswered, there could be, potential issues or additional forms. Even though we're participating in the clearinghouse, even though we may be FDP members, where all of a sudden you might start seeing additional forms, or in addition to the initial letter of intent at the proposal stage, they may ask you questions. So I just wanted to raise the point because we just experienced it ourselves. And I don't know if you have any comments, because this is a little bit of a transition. I don't know if you have any comments with regards with working with each other as other FDP members and other clearinghouse participants, what to do with those unanswered COI questions to avoid, potentially additional language in a subword. So it gets confusing, right? Because we always say, you're not allowed to modify the templates. You're not allowed to add additional things unless it's program specific. But what's happening right now is with these unanswered, if you have these potentially unanswered questions, those rules kind of go out the window. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that. And maybe others have experienced that here. Would love to know.
Those are excellent points. And the reason we put them in the clearinghouse is to avoid having them appear on forms, because once something appears on a form at one organization, it tends to migrate, tends to be difficult to get those off. It would be nice if an organization needed that information, if they just emailed the primary contact of the participating organization and said, will you please put that information in the clearinghouse so we and everyone else can access it? There may not be time to do that, but that's a very good point and a good reason for us to require those in June.
Yeah, I'll just say we had an experience recently where a pass-through entity contacted somebody on one of our teams who then contacted me as the primary contact, because at this point in time in the public version of our organizational profile, those questions about DOE, NASA are unanswered. So I, through an email, confirmed that we do have a COI policy that's compliant with the DOE policy. And, just this week, we are working through the process of getting that information updated in the clearinghouse. So I guess I'll, second Robert's comment, it would be a good idea to reach out to that primary contact, because it's possible that the primary contact for that profile is working on it.
Another question came in from Craig Jerome. Is there a similar pushback if you receive a desk review request from a fellow expanded clearinghouse participant? I'm not sure about that. If they're performing a desk review, it's probably project specific and not institutional. And so that probably is a legitimate request that they can make. They may ask for unreasonable things during a desk review, but I'm not sure that that would necessarily conflict with the profile participation agreement that we all follow. But if you're welcome to expand upon that if there's something funny going on with desk reviews. Joanne Couchman says, I noticed the resources on the FDP site are on Google Docs. Are they available anywhere else? My organization blocks access to Google Docs. I'm very sorry about that. They were moved temporarily to Google Docs when the main FTP website transitioned, and we have not followed up to move them back, but that's good to know, and we will. Okay, Jennifer Nesbitt writes, is there a tool that profile managers can use to see where a profile update request is in the process of being certified, reviewed before publishing? I believe that information is on the authorization tab of the profile. If you're a user and you're logged into your profile, the authorization tab should show whether it is in the process, whether it has been submitted or not, whether it has been certified, and then lastly, whether it has been sent to FTP for review. And that it is something that occasionally happens where a profile editor will submit an update. The certifier, maybe they get a notification, maybe it goes into their junk folder, but they don't follow up and certify the profile, and it kind of gets stuck in limbo. And so that's another reason why it's good to make sure that the profile certifier is aware of their role and certifies the updates in a timely manner. And it should be an individual that's in a position to do that. Okay, anything else before we go?
Looks like Kevin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to we get in so the subaward subcommittee gets questions like Craig had asked here about project specific. Like there are many legitimate situations where you could be asked for supporting documentation or for more information from a pass-through entity, and that doesn't, like Robert said, it doesn't really violate the expanded clearinghouse guidelines or the terms of the subaward or the FDP, sorry, the FAQ and guidance that we have published here. So I would just say that should only be done, like we say in our FAQs, if the sponsor is asking for backup or if you as a subrecipient have been deemed high risk as a result of a specific risk assessment, or if there's something specific with that project. So I would just say, always ask the PTE if this is being done for a specific reason rather than a general across the board reason, like i.e. non-specific, because that would be going against the spirit of the subaward terms in the clearinghouse. And I was just wondering, based on Stephanie, when you saw that attachment, because we might see more of this and, say over the next several months, how did it look? Was it very much word for word from the prime sponsor, federal awarding agency, or was it?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, and so unfortunately, like I don't have all the details, but I will say that probably some of it was copied, but then we wound up working with our compliance office because there was some language that was written in there that seemed confusing with regards to whether the subrecipient was going to follow their own policy or the pass-through entity's conflict of interest policy. And so there was definitely some conflicting or weird language that had to be carefully reviewed. So I would say, no, it wasn't an exact word for word of the policy, but some text that caused it to question like which policy we were following, our own or the pass-through entities. So in other words, bottom line and summary, you have to look at it carefully. But yeah, like I think it's something to look out for, especially if your institution hasn't finalized your DOE policy yet. You might start seeing these. And technically, and this is what I wanted to ask you guys, because, we always say, don't include extra things in the templates, unless it's project specific, unless it's because of a risk assessment. This is a situation where in the clearinghouse, we left it unanswered. And so technically, I guess that pass-through entity, they're playing fair, right? Like they're not really, it's not something we could really push back on other than explain the status of where we are. If that helps. I'm done.
No, I think
Yeah,
that
it
makes
does.
sense. I think we have to, allow each other some grace and dispensation because we've allowed such a long time frame to respond to these questions. I think we just need to be understanding with each other as best we can.
Okay, anything else before we go? Well, if you think of anything, please get in touch with us. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. in May.